to order. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight's Planning Commission meeting. And as always, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Commissioner Keldorf to lead us all.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. And can we have roll call, please?
Chair Baldino.
Here.
Vice Chair Newman.
Present.
Commissioner Keldorf.
Here.
Commissioner Heschler.
I'm here.
And Commissioner McGuire is absent.
Thank you, Venus. Now it's time for public communications. Do we have any? We don't have a Zoom hookup. No Zoom. We're just going live. Wow.
Going directly live. And in
Wow,
person.
that's good.
Yeah.
Saves so much time. All right, seeing no one approach the dais with comments, I'll go ahead and close public communication. Next on the agenda, written communications. Were there any written communications not included in our packet?
Nope, no written communications.
Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. We have several meeting minutes. Does anyone want to pull any of those?
No.
If not, I'll accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, consent calendar is approved. Next item, continue business none, new hearing none. We are here today on a presentation and study session regarding preparation of ordinances on the following: affordable housing density bonus, transitional and supportive housing, both of which are state mandates, and a micro unit regulation. Okay, can we have a staff report?
Sure, we'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to Paul Samaras, who will go ahead and give a brief update. And the whole purpose of this meeting and item on the agenda is to seek some direction from the council. From the Planning Commission. I upgraded you guys real quick there. Seek that direction from you and have a discussion and in terms of how that gets incorporated into our overall affordable housing strategy plan. And so anyhow, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Samaras.
Good evening, Chair Baldino, fellow commissioners. Tonight we'd like to have a discussion with you on 3 specific topics that you just mentioned. We have a short presentation for you and the public this evening, and then we would like to just dive right in and get your questions and direction. Our recently adopted housing element includes these 3 topics under program number 8, the Municipal Code Amendments. And with regards to jumping right into the state density bonus, you're already familiar with the concept of the law. It allows developers to propose a specified percentage of affordable units in their developments in return for a density bonus. The higher the percentage of affordable units, the higher the density bonus. Also, the higher the percentage of affordable units, the more incentives or exceptions a developer can receive beyond just the density bonus, parking, height, other things. The information sheet that we provided you in the packet had an example of a development on a site that actually is on the candidate sites, and the housing element. We won't go into that in detail, but it is part of your packet. Our goal as part of program number 8, as I mentioned, is to adopt an ordinance incorporating the state density bonus law into our code and to establish a process for reviewing and processing density bonus requests. We don't have a process today in our municipal code. With regard to transitional and supportive housing, the state law requires cities to treat these uses as residential uses and permit them in all our residential zones under the same standards as our typical residential uses. This slide here has a short description of those 2 concepts, and it was also included in your packet. Our goal as part of program 8 of the housing element is to adopt an ordinance amending our zoning code and to make it clear that these uses are permitted in the R1, the R2, and our R3 zones in the city. Moving along, micro units, or single room occupancy units, or SROs as they're called sometimes. Now, there's no specific state mandate to permit or regulate these units, I guess, except in the context of our overall RENA obligation to kind of facilitate affordable housing production. This slide has a brief description of what microunits are, and this was also included in more length in your packet. Cities typically permit microunits near transit areas and have special standards to facilitate and control their development. Some of the standards in other cities' ordinances include the following: operational standards such as on-site management or the length of stay for tenants, amenities such as, bathrooms, laundry facilities, kitchens, and to the extent to which they are private, restricted to individual units, or shared in common with all the units. Zoning standards such as parking minimums or other zoning standards. Location standards such as the proximity to transit or to different similar developments. And potentially affordability requirements or incentives. With that, as mentioned above, there is no state mandates to adopt a microunit ordinance, but it is one of our programs in our housing element, and it is one of the ways to potentially facilitate the addressing the need for affordable units in the city. So with that, we'd like to open this up to discussion, hear your thoughts, answer any questions, and take your direction on some of these topics. That concludes
All
our
right,
presentation.
thank you, Paul, for that presentation. Any thoughts or comments?
I do have a question about the micro units and how, I know that they are kind of by design affordable, but how they qualify for affordable. Because some of the, like if you were gonna get tax credit funding, they put minimum size requirements on bedrooms, and I imagine that those are significantly below that size. So would we still get RENA credit for those units?
No, these are, we're using the term affordable differently than we would so with the affordable categories that are affiliated with the RENA categories. We're saying they're affordable based on the cost per square foot when they lease them out. It's you're paying less rent because you're living in less square footage.
Got it, but they don't go towards satisfying lower income or low income.
That's
on
correct.
RENA.
Unless they doubled
we make that
as,
part of
yeah.
our ordinance.
If they were actually truly affordable units that met the RENA standards, then they would count.
Okay, and I don't know enough about that. Like, I know that from a tax credit perspective, you wouldn't qualify. But would Kaiser Marston say that you could get them qualified by the state as affordable units?
Yeah, if specific to your question related to the minimum unit sizes that affordable units have to fall under, we'd have to look more into that. I mean, that would be something we need to look into as part of the development of our micro unit ordinance if we pursue that.
So are you saying that these small micro units may not qualify because they're not large enough in some cases?
Right, Commissioner Caldor's making the point that in order to qualify as a RENA affiliated affordable unit and get the tax credit that the state offers, they have minimum unit sizes, and so in some cases they may not qualify.
Gotcha. But if they are market rate and then some of those micro units are offered below market rate, then they would potentially qualify, or they're just out completely because of square footage?
We gotta look into it further.
I think they're saying affordable only because they're smaller than the average bear, so you're gonna pay less, but it's still a market rate unit. So as rents go up, these little SROs are gonna be as expensive as anything else. They're not, there's no deed restriction saying these units are affordable.
Right.
And if they don't give us any credit, then what are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm curious everybody else's thoughts. I've heard Mayor Boyles kind of promote the idea of a micro unit. I don't
Okay,
love
my
them, but-
concern, here's the thing. The hypothetical you gave us was great, right? Bank of America, we've already put an overlay on this property. Somebody can roll into town and build a bunch of houses there because we were under the gun to do something that we had to do with the state, which is rezone a bunch of land for housing without really having a traffic. I'm getting feedback. Anyone else?
They're
That
just
you?
really loud. Our new microphones are very
Jeez, it's COVID.
projector.
Right? So they gave us an example of if someone took that Bank of America and they wanted high density, they could get all these units. And what's not in there is, okay, how does that impact everyone who lives around Bank of America and already doesn't have anywhere to park? And then you add micro units on the top of that, and I think it's like, the unintended consequences are pretty extreme. And especially if these micro units aren't gonna get any numbers for the state of what we need, then what are we talking about? A bunch of millennials who don't wanna own a car?
Yes.
You know, like, is that really the priority of when we're talking about zoning our city? And I know I'm being facetious, but I'm not.
I know. I mean, I think my interest in those, without getting any credit for them, is pretty non-existent.
And if it's like one of the last things the state's not making us do, let's be clear, the first two things we have to do. The state is making us change our R1 zone once again to add transitory housing. Okay, and then the state is making us do, what's the second one? Density bonus, right? So now we've got overlays where we're saying, come on in and throw a bunch of houses, and now you get a state density bonus on top of it. Like, what is the review process? What can we say yes and no to anymore? Pretty much nothing. So if there's like, if you're telling me the state is not making us do something and we don't get arena credit for it, then why are we jamming more people into less square footage if we don't have to do it? How does that make sense? I don't get the benefit. And just because it's less in size, so we hope it'll be below market, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be true. There's no deed restriction on it.
But is it a way to help increase the arena numbers?
No, that's what we just discussed.
No, I know, but if they did qualify.
But they can't, because they're too small.
We don't know that yet.
Oh, okay.
It's something that we need to look into. It may impact the tax credits, but it may not impact the credit that the city might get for addressing.
So we could
So would a
mandate.
developer, is it something that's popping up around? Is it a popular new sort of thing that's happening?
In denser areas, yes.
Yeah.
I would say that this is not a new thing. It's been around for a long time, but it is a newer thing on the west side and South Bay cities, certainly. And it's a popular model for denser areas, as you're pointing out.
We don't know this, but other cities, we don't know if they're using them to help increase their, or meet the arena numbers that they've got.
I don't know that off
I don't
the
have
top
that
of my
answer
head.
myself
Well, I think
yet,
that's
but
worth
we can
studying.
confirm.
I do know that there are some cities that use it as a mechanism to increase density without increasing bulk and mass to a structure. That is a common strategy to incentivize the use of micro units to allow the same or more units in a lesser of a space. And so you don't see the massing that you would typically see.
So it might be palatable to developers.
Yeah, you get more
that
people,
results in
more money.
less construction costs, more.
But it wouldn't be beneficial, if it's really not gonna be beneficial for the city of El Segundo unless it helped us meet.
Not if you live next door. It's not beneficial to you.
So for
And we don't
comparison,
need the arena numbers from it. Doesn't help.
do you guys know the size of the small units at Pacific Coast Commons, just as a size comparison to these micro units?
I can look that
The
up.
studios
But
or whatever
I
they were?
want to say they're like at least 650
Yeah.
square feet.
Yeah,
And these were 150 to
to
450?
400.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right?
yeah.
It's like a storage
Closet.
closet.
I don't know. I
150.
feel about micro units like I feel about overbuilding office. Like people build it and nobody comes is but
Right.
it's not my area, so.
Right, you're gonna raise a family in 150 square feet?
Yeah. Hey, it's fine as a dorm.
Family of 8?
Yeah.
Right, there's no college here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
College of Hard Knocks.
Okay, let's start with the affordable housing density bonus. We have to adopt this no matter what, correct? Let's try to go one at a time. Okay.
Yes.
The state offering us any like money to help plan for these density bonuses as far as parking offsite or anything like that?
No.
The answer is no, okay, obviously.
Yeah.
So what can we do? Okay, same analogy, the Bank of America parking lot is now a high-density housing development. They get the state density bonus. We can't require they get parking. Can we have our own parking in lieu fee, like we do here? The folks at downtown who want to add on, we make them pay for mysterious parking spaces that don't exist. Same thing in Smoky Hollow. So if someone wants to develop on PCH and throw 40 units into a square block, can there be a parking in lieu to say, hey, you got to help us compensate, or no?
It would have to be studied. You know, state law, which also this density bonus is not new to the state. This has been around for at least a decade or two. And so developers have been able to take advantage of the state law for a very long time. But the key component is we cannot require anything that would render a project infeasible. If they are providing the adequate number of affordable units, baseline is we can't require anything that renders the project infeasible. And so it's likely that that would be used as a mechanism to prove that we're doing something to render it infeasible.
Hypothetically, if it was challenged in a court of law, I would agree with you. But I think we can apply the same burden to some multi-million-dollar developer who wants to make a buck on Sepulveda that we do to our small mom and pops on Main Street who want to add a little bit of space and we make them pay for parking. So I think we treat everyone the same way, and I get it. The state's making us do things that we're uncomfortable with. But to the extent that we can, let us try to, play by the rules that everyone else plays with. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I want to make it impossible or infeasible, but let them play by the same rules that we make the folks at Smoky Hollow or Main Street. I mean, if we're doing parking in lieu, why doesn't it work on that side of town?
But the density bonus doesn't require us to lower parking conditions or anything like that. So the developer
it does.
still
It
has
does.
to.
Actually,
It
it
does.
does.
No, it
Actually, it
does.
does, yeah.
That's
If
like
you
part of the
qualify-
kicker is they get to override what the city requires and say, oh, the
Yeah.
state says I get a density bonus. I don't have to comply with your requirements
So
of having
the
so many
reduction
parking
is
spaces.
from what to
Yeah,
what?
the fact sheet that we gave you basically states that if a proposal qualifies for state density bonus, the city cannot require more than some specified parking ratios per unit. And I'll just pull this up real quickly over here.
Yes, sorry.
And then sometimes none.
None, right. So it's like the folks who live there, we're gonna imagine they don't own a car or need a parking space, and then that pushes it onto the streets and,
Okay, I have those numbers here if you'd like. For studios, it's 1 space maximum that the city can require. For 1 bedroom, 1 space. For 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom, 1.5 spaces. And then for 4 bedroom units, 2.5 spaces. That is the maximum that a city could require. So,
And even despite that, if they make a finding or assert that imposition of that would, to Michael's point, interfere with the development of a density bonus unit, then that would have to be waived as well.
they could request a further reduction of those parking requirements as part of their application.
Right. Our current parking code, though, is not designed for apartments at all. So while I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying about the consequences of having too few parking spaces for too many people, our current code, I would say, is over onerous on parking.
maybe, right? But the reality is when you drive down those streets and it's full of townhomes and apartments right now, you start adding more housing there. Like those people who live there already park on the street and they've got garages and carports and everything else. So you can't tell me that slapping a giant 4-story high-rise, especially putting little micro units in there, isn't gonna flood our streets with more cars with nowhere to park. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
It is.
I'm
It's
not sure
it's a
there's anything we
different
can do
And it's our
resident,
job to
though.
try to plan for it. Like, the
I
burden is on the
understand.
city. So either it's some citywide parking permit program or something, but if we keep amending our code to comply with the state law, we're gonna be faced with a development that we can't say no to, because they're just following what we all kind of rubber stamp up here on a regular basis.
right.
So we need to start thinking about when this does happen, and people start complaining, what tools do we have to try to help people out? Because right now, we don't have a lot, right? We can ask the developer stuff, but, you know, the way development deals are negotiated here, they're not negotiated. No offense to staff at all, but, like, I think we need to be very careful. The state law stuff, we have to do. I get it. We have to incorporate. The state trumps our city code, and if they want us to have this stuff, we have to have it. But, you know, let's try to be smart about it.
Yeah. Well, I do like the idea of having the same requirements that we have for other districts in town, and why
Right,
not?
that's not, we're not being predatory or saying
Right.
we don't want this type of thing, but if,
Right.
you gotta play by the same rules.
And so is staff concerned that if a developer sees that clause and says, oh, well, the state says I don't have to do that, then therefore you have a conflict?
Well, we can certainly look into it. I mean, the reality is, projects that provide affordable housing have different rules than projects that don't. So I get the sentiment that we gotta make everybody play by the same rules, but we're confronted with a situation where that's literally not the scenario. We cannot do that, but we can look at where we can. We can look at the parameters that we have to impose upon developers who provide affordable housing. Parking may be one of them, it may not be.
Well, it's not affordable housing. It's this idea of high density housing, right? The idea of we're gonna underpark it because we're gonna share parking with the commercial, and here's a traffic study from some consultant that says it's gonna be fine. You know, like I think we need to really look at what tools do we have as a city to make some practical decisions that help protect people that live around these projects and,
Right.
and you know, have to drive up and down these streets or walk to school, and they're worried about traffic and safety. You know, and there's a million words you can use of why these are city priorities that must be addressed. But it's not just about the affordable housing. And again, when we talk about affordable housing, this is not, you know, low-income housing, you're making $120,000 a year. And what I liked about Pacific Coast Commons, and I don't like about micro units, is that there, all the units had to be the same. 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, they're all the same. My fear, if we do micro units, then are only the micro units the affordable housing ones? No.
No, and we are talking about affordable housing at this point. So we're only talking about projects that would fall under the affordable housing category. But it's similar to Pacific Coast Commons. If a project included a percentage of micro units, then the distribution would have to be equal amongst all different unit types. And so for PCC, that was our studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. If they had a component of a micro unit, then similarly, there would be equitable distribution amongst the units. And one of the questions that we have, because there could be limitations on the micro units. There could be only 10% of the project could be micro units, or 5% or 20%. When Santa Monica first adopted their micro unit ordinance, there was no limitation. And after 6 months, after developers came to town and wanted to develop 100% micro unit projects, Santa Monica quickly unwound that and adopted, I think, a 15% threshold for micro units. So there's good cases out there that we can look at to see what works and what doesn't work. But the micro unit itself, I know we're diverting back to micro units as opposed to staying on topic with affordable units, but the micro unit, it doesn't provide housing for families. It provides housing for a person or a demographic that isn't currently being afforded housing in El Segundo. So this is just a different housing type and a different style, and it diversifies the city's housing stock. And so, but we can go back to affordable housing. I just wanted to put that out there.
I appreciate that. Okay, so can I ask if when we adopt the affordable housing density bonus, these projects are still coming to us for review and approval?
Yeah, there will be a process in place where they have to submit an application for review. To the extent that our current code requires discretionary review, that could include, you know, subdivision request, a site plan review request. So for example, any project that has more than 10 residential units requires what we call a site plan review application, reviewable by the Planning Commission. There is one exception that I believe is in the state law, is if a project proposes 20% or more affordable units, I think there are some required streamlining that the project qualifies for. So at that point, our ability to require discretionary review might be limited.
So does that mean it doesn't come before Planning Commission, or it's possible to come before it, but you still have to respect the streamline?
There are streamlining requirements where if upon application, they're compliant with all objective standards that the city has, which is hard to meet, then they would be subject to only ministerial approval. But otherwise than that,
Over-the-counter approval of a unit more than 10 in one of these overlay
it could be
zones.
2 plus.
Yeah,
It could be
any
units.
project.
It
Yeah.
means that they're not asking for any variances of any kind, which is just unusual.
Yeah, but here's the thing, if we write all this in the code, then when it comes before us, when we start talking about parking and, oh, there's not enough greenery, they're gonna say, well, no, we're only here for a variance on the loading dock, right? I mean, you've been here, we've been told that. You guys are off topic. We're only here for the variance because they don't have enough light poles. So like, I think we need to talk about the big issues. And to the extent we can't, tell me we can't. That's fine. I get it. We've got to do what the state wants us to do.
Yeah,
But
under some scenarios, I think if it's called the SB 375. I'll have to look it up. But if they qualify, as our city attorneys mentioned, if they qualify under the certain percentage that Paul was mentioning, I can't remember what that is. I think it's more than 50%. But if they provide a certain amount of affordable housing units, and it's an additional amount above the commercial square footage that the project is also providing, and they comply with all the city's objective design standards, it will not come before the Planning Commission. It's approved over the counter administratively. So that they won't be considering just one variance. If a project is before you because they're considering a variance, then it's a different conversation. But I assure you that any developer coming to the city, going through the entitlement process that's providing affordable housing, will do what it takes to demonstrate that anything that what we believe to require a variance will be used as a request for a waiver to exempt themselves out from that section of the code. And as long as they can demonstrate that imposing that standard will render the project either infeasible or unbuildable, they win that argument in all scenarios. So it's very unlikely that you would be considering a affordable housing project while also considering a variance, because the reality is they will use that and they'll use the luxuries of state code or state law to exempt themselves out from it.
so we don't even get to talk about the loading dock anymore. Jeez, why are we here? Seriously. Like, I can make $50 a lot easier than giving opinions.
Well, we appreciate your opinions, and
Thank you,
what
Michael.
we'd like to do, Chair, is we'd like to take the commission's opinions and try to determine whether those are things that we can legislate, and those are things that we can incorporate into objective design standards into our zoning code. And so we do appreciate, and that's why we're here today as part of this discussion and study session, is to have this conversation so that when we come back before you, we'll have some better answers and we can more concrete tell you what we can and can't do.
I appreciate that.
I
Thank
am
you.
in no way lobbying for this, but the density bonus is a bonus on the underlying zoning. So if parking is the concern, then you set the base zoning to something that you can live with, right? I mean, it's not like somebody can all of a sudden build 200 units on an acre. We don't have a zone that supports that.
If they offer enough, if they're 100% affordable, they can get unlimited density.
Well, that's
Right.
Okay, so I guess just to clarify, so the parking ratios that Paul described, those are only valid on the density, or on the bonus rather, or it's valid across the whole project?
The whole project.
You know, to get unlimited density, you would have to build a 12-story tower at a cost-prohibitive price. It's just not, it's like the sky is not falling.
I know. Let me ask this. Can we ask, and I don't know if we need, well, let me ask the question. And let me see if I have consensus. But I would like to avoid what I've seen as a history of us being presented very large projects under some time constraint to where we are, for the first time, talking about parking and making decisions about what we would like to see in the development agreement. So could there be a mechanism where if you want to build a housing development over 10 units, then you got to give like a dog and pony show to the Planning Commission as a public forum? And we're not taking any action on it, but I just want a chance to inform the public. If there is some unlimited density project coming, then tell us in a public forum that we have to do this because of state law, right? At least once before us to vote on, so there's more public participation or education about this, because I I don't want to be in a situation to where this thing is kind of dropped on us and then we're voting and, people don't find out about it. So explain to me why that can't happen if it can't. And if it can, then why shouldn't we be doing that?
Well, the current code only requires one action from planning commission, and in a lot of these projects, you're making a recommendation to city council, right?
Right.
They don't die at planning commission, and if they do, they're always appealable to the city council. There's not a process in place to require multiple visits to the planning commission.
Although if I may
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
add
Paul.
that in the last few years, staff has been, let's say, encouraging developers of larger projects to do public outreach. So to have public meetings, present their project to the community or the neighbors at least, so that people are made aware that something is coming down the line. That does not completely address your particular question, but I'm just trying to say that that's something that the staff is sensitive to, and we try to do that. Perhaps we can look at some other methods to kind of get the word out and maybe get the word to you, I think is what you're trying to get at.
I'm saying we need to have a more transparent process of how community benefits are being negotiated on behalf of the people that live in town.
Well, I'll talk on that a little bit. So community benefits, and again, I'll revisit the planning commission's role in the bulk of these decisions is to make a recommendation to city council. It is not to negotiate. It's not to even weigh in on. I mean, you can certainly make recommendations, but it's not to represent the terms of a development agreement on behalf of the city. It is to make recommendations to city council. City council authorizes the city manager to negotiate development agreements, and it's the city manager's job to speak on behalf of the city council, who they in turn discuss, if not specific terms of development agreements, they discuss the components of development agreements that they would like to see in upcoming projects. And so they utilize the general plan, they utilize the city's currently in the process 4-year strategic plan that council develops. They utilize their conversations with city council to determine what is negotiated in a development agreement. And so when it comes to planning commission, that would be time to make recommendations on any additional components of the development agreement. But to your point, by the time it gets to you, that negotiation has already happened. So what I would advocate is that if there are things that the commission wishes to see as part of development agreements moving forward, make a recommendation unrelated to a project of the categorical areas that you would prioritize as a commission. Make that recommendation to city council via resolution, and we can present that to the city council, not specific to a particular project, but that would be indicative of, hey, moving forward, the commission wants to see these types of programs or these types of contributions, community benefits negotiated into development agreements, and city council can turn around and then say, yes, thank you, or no, thank you, and city manager, here you go. But that would be the appropriate formal process. So otherwise, it's not the commission's role to negotiate DAs. And I get the sentiment of, it being presented at sort of what feels like the last minute, and what can you do at that point other than pass it along to city council. So, but the right way to address that is, let's talk about it today, maybe not this very moment, but let's talk about development agreements and the components that can be typically negotiated in those, including community benefits, and then we can formulate a recommendation from Planning Commission that's representative of what this body wants to see moving forward. And then council can give staff direction accordingly.
No, I hear what you're saying. That does make sense, but why can't we mandate more than one public hearing on a large project?
You can.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that our current code doesn't require that outside of when an ordinance has to go to city council is required to read it twice, and that's due to state law, not our local ordinance.
No,
But
I got that.
You could change our
The second
local
reading's a
ordinance.
formality, but
Yeah.
why can't we say, okay, if you're gonna trigger a density bonus, you're gonna have a large project, then the least we can do is ask you to talk to us about it more than one time.
Mhm.
I don't think that's gonna prohibit anyone from developing in town.
Yeah, we could require, I don't know, I've never seen this done, but you could, I suppose we could require two readings from the planning, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how that would line up preemption-wise, because if if we did nothing, the state law requirements would stand, and we'd
Right.
have to abide by them. I think we'll just have to look at what the procedural requirements are to see if there's any wiggle room for us to add a layer of additional review.
Yeah, frequently, cities do have, it's another version of it, they have, design review board, and that, it goes to a design review board before the planning commission takes action. Some cities, the planning commission serves as a design review board, but it's frequently, there could be a separate body that serves as that board, or you could be both, and so it could come to you as a design review board, to get initial feedback, and then it could come back to you for formal, entitlement actions or recommendations.
Right, I'm not saying we'd give a thumbs up or thumbs down, but we would just understand what's being proposed. And then when people ask us about it, we'd have some base of knowledge saying, yeah, this is what they want to do there, and there's going to be a meeting in the future, come give us your comments.
That brings me to another point that I think that Paul was already making, which is, informally, staff has advocated for applicants to engage with the community, and so there are other cities that actually require a community engagement. They spell out up to 2-3 community meetings. This is the content of those meetings, and that forces the community engagement. But I think we've all been in this long enough to know that no matter how many times you do that and how much you do that, there will always be the sentiment that people didn't find out soon enough or early enough. But it doesn't mean we can't continue to progress that effort. It's just I'll probably never ever personally be able to satisfy that shortfall or that feeling of the shortfall of the community not being notified. But we can advance that and look at different ways to advance that.
Do cities that have design review boards, how does that comply with state mandates?
For another city client, they actually essentially they made their design review board strictly advisory, because having to go both to a design review board and the planning commission was becoming very time prohibitive and costly, and was especially challenging when in dealing with permitting deadlines and things of that sort. So it's a double-edged sword.
But you brought up a good point, Ryan, about, there's a lot of people sitting up here in this commission that know a lot about how to make good recommendations to city council and how to negotiate development agreements, which, so is there from this conversation, did I garner any opportunity to make that happen?
No,
Okay.
but yeah, that's what we've been
I
told,
know.
is that's not our job.
No, it's not, but recommendations to city council would be. And as you
But I
say,
would just
before
think-
it goes to city council,
Right, if we get it before it becomes this has
Before
to
it's
be
big.
approved next
Right.
week,
Yeah.
then we can have an honest discussion like we always do. We say whatever we
Right.
want, and the developer gets some ideas maybe, or
Right.
people talk about it and they make some changes.
or
and-
perhaps that people on.
Or they don't, I don't know.
People that sit on this commission need to run for city council, that's the other
Oh,
option.
stop.
That's what I'm saying. Well, it's one way to get into the.
If I may, Chair, about, it is almost always the case that a project has to be approved next week, but that doesn't mean that you have to approve or forward something to the council right away.
Oh, I know. Thank you, Paul. Yeah,
Right.
they're always in a hurry, aren't they? Can I ask, switching gears, about the transitional and supportive housing? The code text that we have in there, are we just adopting straight what the state wants? And again, can we add anything to that? And I'm thinking like, I don't know, security, cameras, or anything, because what we're talking about is putting halfway houses anywhere in the R1 zone, right? Great idea until it's next to your $2 million house you just bought in El Segundo. So what can we do when people start freaking out about this to say, hey, the city knows what your concerns are and it's totally safe because we're requiring a license and a bond from this company. We're requiring insurance. We're requiring security. Are we doing anything like that in the code, or are we're just,
No.
okay.
We are
Can we
not.
look into doing something like that?
Sure, let me just make a quick attempt to respond to your question. number one, the state law, from my understanding, prohibits the cities from imposing additional requirements beyond what's required for other residential uses in those zones. Now,
There's the
but I
relevance.
also wanted to remind the commission that, you may recall maybe about 15, 20 years ago, the state passed another law with regard to small group care facilities or small daycare home facilities. And initially, there was a proliferation of, sober living facilities in some cities and a lot of hoopla, but you don't hear as much complaining about those these days. So, sure, there is some concern about what you suggest, but those smaller facilities, operate in a lot of cities, and you don't hear as many concerns several years after they were permitted. So, just wanted to kind of mention that, just to kind of help sort of relieve
Okay.
some of that
So
concern.
what I hear you saying, we can't add anything to it, but they've been around forever and it's not really a big problem. Okay,
More or less.
that helps.
So do these things tend to take on, these transitional housings tend to take on a commercial use at some point? Is somebody exchanging money in order to take on, to facilitate these transitional folks? Is there a Section 8 aspect to it? What do these things typically look like?
If I could jump in while you ponder that for another client, but it's actually huge multinational corporations that have contracts. This one in particular was transitional for nonviolent folks coming out of prison. They were transitioning back into life, but it was the Geo Corporation receiving money from the Bureau of Prisons, and Geo Corporation is a huge money-making enterprise, but that was their model, and they get paid on a per bed basis under their contract.
So are we talking about the Geo Corporation owning a house, a residential house that then becomes a transition? What does this thing look like?
It looks like a dorm, basically. Yeah, so different bedrooms,
micro
some
units.
common areas,
Right.
and
So it's new construction, or it's the renovation of a multifamily deal
yes.
that becomes this, okay?
What they're saying is we have to allow these anywhere we allow housing. So we can't say, okay, it's cool in the R2 or the R3. It's anywhere they want to buy a piece of land or a house, they can make it a transitional supportive housing.
And if I could just add, under the same development standards. So if your building height is a certain level, your setbacks, those things.
Chair, just to add a little bit of fuel to the fire. There's recent state law within the last couple of years that actually prohibit the city from even licensing or regulating
wonderful.
these facilities. And so, our ability to, but I will, they are regulated by the state. And they have enforcement agencies that are far stronger and more proactive than we could actually be. And so there are recourses, and there's reporting and enforcement and inspections that happen that we actually probably wouldn't be able to do on our own. So I'd say that the state's probably a safer agency to trust in the ongoing enforcement and regulation of the facilities that we're worried about. But I just wanted to add that piece
Appreciate
of
that.
nugget
Just when I thought I was going
knowledge
to sleep well tonight,
Yeah.
you add one more little tidbit.
Okay, so
You're
one
welcome.
of these corporations can buy a 20-unit existing place on Imperial and say, you know what, this is gonna be our transitional house now. So, okay.
That's correct.
There is like an adult group home on Center Street that hasn't been a problem.
Yeah.
So they are in town, and that one seems to be fine.
Well,
So
and-
they're not inherently bad.
Of
It's
course
just
not, they're not
I think we're
necessarily bad
bemoaning the
people.
lack of control of zoning or planning that we get to do.
Right.
So, okay, so the first two we have to do. So I don't know if there's really any guidance we need to give. We can't really add anything to it,
No.
right?
No.
Parking
One more
Lou, maybe you look
question.
at that.
So
Might not work.
100% affordable project has no density limit. Can we still enact height limits?
We can, but they would be subject to waiver, and the more dense, the more waivers they get. And it's
Waivers
their
meaning
discretion.
additional
It could be
stories
parking,
or-
it could be height,
Yeah.
it could be setbacks.
But not infinite height.
As long as they could demonstrate that it's
Infinite
preventing them
height.
from building the number of units in order to make that project pencil, then I think they can make that argument.
Oh my God. It's crazy. We're amending the code, you know, like it's just, yeah, if it's in the code, go ahead, do it.
And what you guys just described there are the incentives that are listed, right? So if you qualify for certain things, you get a certain amount of incentives, and incentives could be height, could be setbacks, could be
That's correct, yeah,
parking.
yeah.
Chair Baldino, technically, the commission and the city could add incentives above and beyond what the state law requires. So you were asking if
More
there's
than
anything,
unlimited.
if there's anything we can add.
Super unlimited.
Well,
Technically
Infinite.
speaking, the city could, you know, provide higher density bonus,
Let's
for
do that.
instance, you know.
so how are incentives defined? I mean, where does one incentive end and another one begin when you're given incentives?
So state law uses it uses two terms. It uses the term incentive. It also uses the term waiver. And so when you refer to the incentives, you're talking like the density bonus is an incentive. That's something that they're incentivized to do. And so the waivers actually what they're requesting, and you get a certain number of waivers depending on the percentage of affordable units that you're providing. Paul mentioned, and you've just mentioned several items that are typical of waivers, like parking, height, setbacks, but realistically, they can request a waiver from anything in our code, in our zoning code, that is prohibitive financially or physically, structurally preventing the construction of the project, if it's prohibitive of that project materializing.
And there's a Court of Appeals case that the League of Cities is trying to get depublished, which stands for the proposition that if you don't even need to seek a density bonus, but if you qualify for a density bonus, that you can appeal for these waivers as well.
So I think the message we're taking home at this moment, at least related to these two items, we'd like to explore some of these items and explore where the city can practice discretion. We will daylight those when these bring these back to the commission. We'll let you know if there is discretion that we can practice. This is the latitude that we have, and this is the latitude that we don't have. So that's what we're hearing for these two items.
Okay, that's, I think, a pretty accurate summary. Micro units, I am opposed to the idea of allowing this to happen because of the unintended consequences. Can we get a consensus that if the state's not making us do it right now, let's not go down that road? Yeah, so, I know, Michelle, what are you gonna say?
No, I agree with you. I just
What?
know what higher bodies have directed the exact opposite
Hey,
review.
we're here to give our
So
opinions, Michelle,
that, my opinion is,
regardless of the deafness of the ears upon which they fall.
I think a micro unit is like the developer treehouse, like co-living. It sounds very
Right.
cool.
It pencils out.
It
You make a lot of
doesn't,
money.
though, actually, like people aren't really very successful at it because it's a fad.
Would you live in a dorm?
like a
Sounds
perm.
like a nightmare. Can you imagine?
Kind of awesome at the time.
Would you rather have Vinny in your house or in a micro unit?
Oh, he's out the door as soon as I can get him out the door. Come on. Come on.
Well, we still don't know for sure if those units absolutely do not qualify for affordable housing. Is that safe to say?
But even if they did,
confirm
Jay,
that before we.
Like, we're
come back
giving
to-
so much discretion to some outside multinational developer with nothing but money and federal dollars in their pockets to come and drastically rearrange what PCH looks like, or any other thing that we put an overlay on, thinking, oh yeah, it's never gonna happen.
Well, I'm also thinking about the arena numbers that we need to aim for. And
Yeah, but what are you gonna do about that?
Can I add a different perspective? What if you required that of the existing density, a certain number of units were micro units? Would that change, does that change the perspective because of the flip side of the coin that results in smaller structures, cheaper construction, lower cost of housing, contributes positively to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, all these other sort of factors that it contributes. Is there a perspective that does that change? I know traffic and parking is it's not going to touch that, but
So you're saying if we just allow a smaller percentage of the entire project,
require
the thing we don't want.
Well, I'm not going to touch the we don't want or do want. What I'm just saying that there's a flip side to what micro units can provide, or the positive contribution that they do have. I'm not saying that they don't have negative contribution, but there's a flip side. There are some positive components to it, and is it worth exploring a requirement that there is a level of micro units in order
like
to
a percentage, like
yeah.
10%.
Or 5%, whatever.
He's leaning into it. He's embracing
Yes,
it.
he likes it.
Well, so we have to come back to you with options. The micro unit is something that was in the last housing element. It's in this housing element, and so we have to bring something back before you. And a recommendation, just don't do it, doesn't help us bring something back that addresses a something. And so I'm trying to grasp at
So it's
what
in
is
the-
the a something that we can
I got you.
bring back.
So it's in the housing element
Well, what if it were an
as
option?
one of the things we're going to talk about doing in the future, or as we have already done this, or what? Because there's a lot of things in the housing element that we said we were going to do that we never really talked about and gave any approval for. But, you know, we want to show them we're doing what we
Well,
can do.
that could be a very reason why our housing element doesn't get certified. You know, we have to provide annual reports to the
Right.
state that report on these things, and there is a heightened sensitivity. And HCD has hired about 10 times more staff than
I
they've
hear
had
what
for
you're
the last
saying
20
now.
years to actually regulate this. In fact, we just got an email that Paul is responding to in the moment, where they're going back and looking at previous annual housing reports that we've submitted and said, your numbers for your ADUs don't match the numbers you provided for your housing element, so you need to reconcile documents from 2 years ago. So they're not only playing, you know, we're not only focused on today, but they're playing catch up for things that they may have missed in last cycles.
Understood. So then I guess the direction would be, given the comments of commission, come back with a study that shows us how a percentage of requiring micro units would benefit the housing element, and if these micro units could be used for the arena numbers,
Sure.
and how that would actually help reduce the stress of parking and all the other stuff.
Well, and
So I
and
hear
what if it-
exactly what you're saying, and I
what
would
if it
love
were
staff
not-
to report back on that
not
vital part
mandatory?
of our housing element.
But it could be an option, but at a very low percentage.
Well, they're
Yeah.
going to study it
Yeah,
and
we'll
come
look at
back
it.
and say, this
Right.
is how the puzzle piece would come together.
There, we can look at several options.
Right.
One of the exhibits that Paul had provided was, you know, a proximity to transit, or, you know, things that would mitigate trip generation. So we can
Yes.
consider lots of different things like that.
So on that
Right.
one, there was a straight up A or B option where we could do any bus stop, which would expand it all through Main Street, only the Metro, which would be towards PCH, right? So on that, my preference would be only the Metro. Oh, there you go. So this is option one, which would allow micro units, or we say only by the mass, what do you call it, efficient mass
Well, but they
transit.
have unaffected multifamily parcels, right? Is that unaffected means those
Okay,
do
so
not qualify?
On this map here, the dark line, the black line shows a distance of 1 mile from the nearest metro green line. So the parcels that have like that deeper orange color fall within the 1 mile radius. So if for example the city wanted to say, we want all R3 zoned parcels that are within 1 mile of the Green Line station to qualify for micro units development, so we could do this. The ones that have the slightly lighter orange color or pink, they're unaffected, meaning, yeah, they fall outside of that 1 mile radius.
So they don't qualify for the micro unit?
It is up to us to decide whether that
In this
1 mile
scenario.
radius is the criterion. I happen to throw in that little red arc there to show what the half-mile distance is from the Green Line station. So, you know, if we were open to setting a radius, you know, and we wanted some properties to qualify at least, you know, we could have something between, you know, half a mile and a mile. It didn't have to be a.
This would only be R3?
Well, that was the assumption that we kind of made, that, yeah, micro units would be permitted only in R3 zoned properties, yeah. But, you know, if you wanted us to look into, you know, maybe some of those sites that were identified in the housing element, some of those commercial sites where we would apply the mixed-use overlay, that's also a place where we could look at, you know?
Yeah, I would think that's where it would happen if it
Okay.
does. You're gonna transform a parking lot as opposed to those older apartment buildings. I don't think they're going anywhere.
Sure. Yeah, they might not go anywhere, although technically speaking, you could take the existing apartment units and split up those units, and within the same sort of building envelope have more units, especially if you provide a break on parking compared to our standards. So, you know, either way, there are different possibilities or options to consider.
So, I like the idea of asking staff to come back with those things. As long as you're doing that, I feel like it would be great to hear a little report on why microunits work. You know, are there some case studies? Are there case histories of other cities where they've demonstrated that it works? Because, you know, I get your point on parking. If we can solve parking, is there some real public benefit, some real value to it? You know, because the flip side of this is, it's very expensive to live here.
Yeah.
And so if a micro unit, even at market rate, is more affordable to somebody, and it's a good solution for them, but, you know, an old person who lives alone and they're not ready for assisted care, but they want to be in a kind of a communal setting and have neighbors that they know and share a kitchen with, and that's actually part of their social fabric, that could be an interesting thing.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear that.
So I don't know if you guys could do a little bit of research and just
Yeah, well,
see what's out there.
There are dozens of cities that have adopted standards. Perhaps we can look at some of them and bring back some examples, or, you know.
And
do a
I'd love
case
to see
study,
the
find
good
a
and the
case study.
bad, you know? I'd love to see case studies where it works well, and if there's some lessons learned of why it doesn't work, I think that would be helpful for this body as well.
When is this coming back before us, and what do you think?
I don't think we have an exact time frame. I mean, we have a fair amount of
Yeah.
research that we need to
clearly.
do at this point. Well, were we aiming for?
Well, we were
Couple of months?
aiming for summertime.
Okay, yeah.
Which is possible, but it can, you know, we can take our time and make sure we give the commission the information it needs to make a good solid.
Is there a drop dead date with the city? I mean, the state?
No, I mean, the housing element that this was in has already expired. So that's why it's wound up. It's in our new housing element that we've recently adopted. So it's just something that, you know, is going to be, we're going to get increasing pressure from the state if we don't. And we're already in a position where we're having to relook at the housing element that we adopted and resubmit to the state, or revise and resubmit to the state. So if we don't make sufficient progress, and not just this, but just the several programs in our housing element itself, we could be looking at not having a certified housing element, which is troublesome.
So was it just the ADU issue that they sent it back on? Were they?
Oh,
not-
no.
Plenty of other stuff?
I don't know if I
Okay.
want to get into it right now, but
Okay. Fair enough.
As of a few weeks ago, when I last heard, only 4 SCAG cities had certified housing
Wow.
elements.
Out of how many cities in the state of California?
In the SCAG
yeah,
area?
the SCAG, just Southern California.
Just in the
Oh,
SCAG
yeah.
area.
Oh,
but,
wow.
Yeah, so it's still, I mean, small percentage.
Yeah.
Notably, Long Beach they put out a bunch of PR. They were one of the first cities to get their housing element certified. They had a RENA number of 26,000 housing units.
That's crazy.
But they just got theirs
Who's
certified
building
last week.
land in Long Beach that you can live in? Wow. All right, any other comments?
And I think Long Beach is doing a pilot micro,
Maybe that's how they did it.
yeah, so I don't know.
That's how they did it.
26,000 dormitory, one kitchen.
Before you move off the topic entirely, so something else I'm hearing, and it's related, but it's not specific to one of these items. It's just a need to look at our parking ordinance as a whole, but from two perspectives. One, we just need to revisit our parking ordinance and make sure that it's reflective of current parking and trip demands, that it's more realistic. But the second piece of it, I think, is the point that housing is coming. They're going to build in El Segundo, where we're going to build in El Segundo. Businesses are coming, businesses are expanding, and so we also need to look at just a more global strategy to addressing end of trips in El Segundo, people driving here and either living or working, and probably build a more robust TOD program, which is transportation demand, through either parking strategies, trip reduction strategies by proximity to transit, and all that. So we probably need to look at both of those things in the near future as well. Am I hearing some of that?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, you've got the homeowners by Grand Tropez already triggering the city
Right.
codes to stop people from Grand Tropez parking on the street. And once Pacific Commons comes, then we're going to have another little subset.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to look wholesale at a buffer zone between PCH and the residential of what are we doing, if, like you said, knowing that there are going to be high density housing units built here one day. So how do we prepare for it? So I would appreciate that.
Okay.
And how does that segue at all into developer impact fees? So traffic, right? Is parking a developer impact fee? Is that a thing that any
Yeah.
city includes that?
Well, parking and lieu fees. So it depends on how you structure your parking code, because, so for example, and this is why we have to look at it holistically, because you just, if you look at parking in a silo, it's no good the moment after you adopt it. But if you look at parking combined with travel demand and trip generation and parking demand as a whole, then you can structure your parking codes where you adopt parking maximums. Similar, so San Francisco is infamous for this, where they adopted parking maximums, and if a developer develops parking in addition to those maximums, there's I don't want to call it a penalty, but there's a fee to go above the maximums, and those fees are used to help offset the other impacts that the parking trip generations create. There's also other mechanisms to provide incentives for a developer not to park 100% of their project and contribute to other funds that either they can do themselves or other funds that the city has to provide off-site parking or other travel demand strategies that help mitigate the trips in and out of the city. So that you have to look at it holistically for that reason. But it could also result in a fee, essentially, to your point. I'm sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
That makes sense. I just, the calculation of like a traffic mitigation measure is the great mystery to me.
Yeah, and our tools for evaluating traffic are changing. We're no longer using level of service, and so we have to rely on vehicle miles traveled, which is also why we need to look at this more holistically, because the methodology that vehicle miles traveled is more aligned with strategies to reduce trip generation. And so we have to change all sides of the model so that we're all speaking the same language when we're talking about parking and trip generation.
So, Michael, transit-oriented design, TOD, is, sort of contingent upon actually having transit near it. And so have you, in your past life or other jobs, seen TOD that works? And, I know County of LA, City of LA has been giving massive amounts of incentives to TOD design around metro stations and things like that. And I just wondered if that's actually working. Is that reducing traffic in areas? Is it keeping keeping people out of their cars and getting on the metro and or working close by? Is there success in that program?
I mean, if I were to answer that, it would be more of a personal opinion. So I don't have data on it, but we can certainly look at it. It's a tough thing to evaluate, because if you're developing additional density or additional housing or additional floor area at the same time as you're imposing these travel demand or transportation demand strategies. By nature, you're increasing volume more than what's already there. So it's just a tough thing to evaluate to how it offsets it. But the other point I was going to make was it doesn't have to be specific to proximity to transit stations. There's several TDM strategies that are unrelated to being close to a transit hub. There's car share incentives, there's bike share programs, there's all kinds of different ride share programs. There's all kinds of different strategies that don't necessarily relate specifically to being in close proximity to a transit center.
Yeah, changing behavior is hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the land use or planning world, I think the mantra is that you travel or behavior doesn't change unless you force it, and so some of this is us having to force that change behavior, because otherwise we're creatures of habit, and we will do what we're most comfortable doing until we learn something else could be more comfortable or not.
Pretty sure Brenda's the only person who walked here.
Normally that would have been me too, but I actually did not walk today. For the last 3 years, I've walked
1954
here
pickup?
every time. Yeah, except for the 6 months.
I just want to mention to Commissioner Heschler that the South Bay COG actually did a study several years back on Riviera Village in Redondo, in South Redondo. And they studied all the different uses within Riviera Village and the surrounding uses, and they found that having all those residential uses right next to that city center, commercial center, actually increased bicycle and pedestrian trips substantially. So bicycle and pedestrian trips were actually a very big percentage of overall trips taken by residents, in close proximity to that center.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a transit station, but if you have the right mix of uses in a neighborhood, then people feel less of a need to drive to go everywhere.
Yep, and they've done a good job with nice, safe bike lanes, and they've made it easy for people to do that. So, I mean, that's an important part of the equation, is creating the environment that allow people to feel like they can leave their car at home.
Yeah, I think, and the point I was making is, even with that study, if you ask somebody who saw what was out there before and looks at what's out there now, they're going to say, oh, it's busier, there's more traffic. But in reality, more people are getting out of their cars. But to the observant eye, it's going to feel different.
Well, what you don't want is a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
You don't want an extra car for every person that shows up.
Right.
And so, not that we're here to talk about east of PCH, but I mean, we have almost a perfect situation with 3 metro stations and a lot of commercial and opportunities to have people live near a metro station and walk to lots of employment is a pretty powerful thing here. It's kind of a secret weapon.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem with how it's zoned over there, we had to give permission for a dry cleaner to happen over there. So like all the little moms and pops
totally
and the
understand
coffee
the zoning
shops and stuff
implications.
you want, we got to change the whole landscape.
Right,
But
right. It's
saying
an
a good
entire planning
conversation.
exercise.
Yeah.
Yep.
I hear you.
So fix it, Paul. That'll do it.
Make it
Yes, sir.
happen, Paul. Make everything work. Okay, well, great discussion. Thank you, everyone. I want to apologize for my cynicism. It has nothing to do with the folks in this room. I believe we're all working very hard. It's just this state-imposed mandates are just beating me down. But I want to thank you all for the work you do, and I look forward to continuing this discussion as we move forward. Okay, next is a report from our Director of Development Services.
Okay, a couple things. On that note, actually, I just saw an email today outlining several Assembly bills and Senate bills that are in the works that continue to dilute local jurisdiction or local policing powers. And so at some point when those things become a little bit more mature and we have more information, I'll definitely forward those along to the commission. I think it's important that, you know, what's been expressed by council and this commission is the desire to retain as much local policing power as we can. And so, you know, there'll likely be an effort to contest those things, or at least express our strong opposition to those things. And so the more you can help spread that word, the only way to do it is that our local elected, not our local, our regional and state elected officials know what we want. And so I'll forward those along, because it's a little disconcerting, some of the additional efforts being made currently in this legislative cycle. Otherwise, I think I provided this update before. I'll say it again just in case. The inclusionary housing study has shifted gears to be looking at increasing density in the R3 zone, either in part or in whole, where it makes sense to incentivize redevelopment of certain R3 properties. So we don't know where, we don't know to what extent, but that study has shifted to looking at the R3 zones and where it makes sense and what type of density it would take to facilitate redevelopment of some of those properties. And so that's the direction that study is currently going. We may come back in a future life to talk about inclusionary housing. And I've gotten a couple other questions for updates. One was related to the status of the Civic Center repurposing. I don't know if there's an official name of it, but the RFP that was issued to look at repurposing the Civic Center, and that we're currently in a holding pattern. We're doing some analysis. We got to go back to City Council and provide an update on what that analysis is related to what would actually be redeveloped here before we go any further in that process. And so we're taking maybe 2 steps backwards in the process from where the RFP was released. Is the RFP being released gives the assumption that we're ready to move forward with something, but we don't know what we're moving forward with yet. So we've taken a couple steps back to identify what we'd actually be moving forward with if we were to move forward. So we're in a holding pattern on that. Did you have a question?
Well, yeah, so did you award the RFP to anybody, or are you withdrawing the RFP? And
the RFP just closed. I think that it was before my time here. The city received, I think, I don't know, 12, 15 proposals, and that's the extent of it. There's been
so nothing's been awarded.
Nothing's been done, yeah. And the second question.
Developer impact fees.
The developer impact fee study. And so that will be coming back to council. Finance is working on wrapping that study up within the next month or two. And those impact fees will likely go back before council in June or July. It requires 60 days before it's actually effectuated. So you're probably looking at August by the time the new developer impact fees are imposed. And so I think they're programming that to go back to city council in June or July. And so those impact fees, just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, park and lieu fees, the fire, PD, library, and not schools. Schools does their own fee. There was a couple other additional fees that they were studying. But those 4 are carryovers from the previous impact fee analysis. They've added a couple to include, I think, traffic or some infrastructure-based fees.
Okay. And
Parks, open space is one of them, yeah.
And just on record, although we were assured, like Pacific Coast Commons will 100% be subject to new developer impact fees.
So Pacific Coast Commons depends on when they submit their building permits.
This is what I'm concerned about.
But if they submit their building permit and its application, then they are vested in the fees that are in existence at that time. I don't have a time frame of when they're going to submit. I'm sure they're watching very carefully because some of these fees haven't been updated for a very long time, and it's going to have a significant financial, or could have a significant financial impact on their project. They will be subject, if they are subject to the fees, if they submit after the new impact fees go into place, they will be subject to the fees that are only updated. So for example, we have a park in lieu fee. It's roughly $2,200 per unit. If that fee changes to a higher amount, they will be subject to that that new fee. If there is a new impact fee, a new category that's created, so, I don't know, I don't even know what example to give, but like a trash in lieu fee, I don't know why that came to my head, but they would not be subject to any new categories. That's how the DA is written. So it's all contingent on when they submit their building permits.
Anything we can do to encourage the finance department to expedite the process?
I know they're working quickly. That's all I know. I know they're working quickly. They have a draft or a near final draft version of the document. It's currently under review by city staff, and they're working on getting it to city council as soon as possible. May's out of the question. Because there's certain noticing requirements that are mandatory for this to be considered by city council, and they're trying to get there in June because city council goes dark in July and first meeting in August. So they're trying to get there by June, because then otherwise it's not till September. So that's I think at this point that's the best that we can do, given the noticing requirements and the calendar that we have in front of us.
Can you tell us what's going on at the old Stickenstein?
I don't have any information. I know it was listed and possibly sold, but Eduardo?
No, nothing to update, nothing to report on. I know that we had inquiries in the past about it, but as Michael said,
Nothing's come
was
across
listed.
county.
Nothing's been submitted. We hear rumors of who bought it, but we'll stop short of there at that point.
Fair enough.
And I have questions about two different projects. Any updates on the gateway that was sort of underway? The
signage?
The signage?
On Main Street?
Mm-hmm, at Main Street, yep.
Could be a whole Parks and Rec episode just on the gateway signage.
Seriously.
Maybe 2 or 3 episodes.
Yes. We can get back to you. I'm failing to remember the latest update from Elias Hessoon, our Public Works Director. I know that I know that it's been, it's in the works. They might be awarding a contract soon. I think that might be the next step. But I don't want to misspeak,
I'd
so we'll
love
look
an
into
update
it.
on that.
Yeah.
And then also the Greenway project on aviation.
Mm-hmm.
Would be nice to get an update on that.
Well, that I know for certain. The last direction was provided by City Council that they did not want any city staff working on the Greenway project, and so that was the
So
last.
You just violated that. That's what I'm talking about.
That was the last direction. In fact, it was a very specific conversation at the dais at a council meeting that they didn't want staff working on that project. But I do know that the EDAC is working on a study. But I haven't heard where they're at in it. But they are looking at that amongst a few other studies that they're doing.
Yeah, well, I know that they were trying to go after some metro grants and some additional funding mechanisms. And so, I mean, short of not having the city staff spend any time on it, it would be such a terrific improvement to one of the ugliest edges that our town has. So, I mean, it would be it'd be an awesome thing. And, basically it's the front door of that entire new redevelopment. Is that Beyond Meat?
Yeah.
There?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. I mean, that's their backyard. I think they'd be very interested. Okay, thanks.
All right, report from City Attorney's Office.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
All right, Planning Commissioner comments?
I think I've exhausted mine.
It's the Run for Education on Saturday, the 10K. So
There you go.
get out and
Get out,
run.
support the schools.
Yep. For the kids.
All right, that brings us to our adjournment. Our next meeting will be May 12th here in council chambers. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.